Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for making this a part of your day. So honored to be able to speak with you today. For those that don't know me, my name is James Weeks. I'm the author of the book Meditations Across the Kings River. I'm the producer of the upcoming documentary film, also Across the Kings River. To learn more about me, you can visit acrossthekingsriver.com. So glad that also that you're on my Facebook page. I really look forward to coming out every day and sharing just a bit of information, a bit of inspiration. Today, I'm very excited to have a special guest joining us. His name is Baba Oloye Aikula. Um, and I'm very excited because I would say, one, he's a Ifa priest, but he's a fluent Yoruba speaker. And I first had a conversation with him actually back in 2008. Then I was blessed to have a conversation with him last year in Florida. And so, although there are millions and millions of people who are interested in Yoruba spiritual practice, Yoruba spiritual tradition, very few actually speak the language, and can converse in the language. That's a whole different level and ballgame. So he's definitely a cultural treasure in that respect and in other respects. So I wanted to have a chance for him to share some of his journey with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce him. I'm going to just speak a few words to him in Yoruba language. He'll speak back to me. And then I'll tell you what it is that I said to him, and he'll do the same. Uh, he will say what it is that he said to me, and so we'll have a dialogue, a conversation, and he'll share his insights, and I'll share some of my insights as well. Eka san,
Ẹ káàsán o,
ṣé àlàáfíà ni ó wà?
a dúpẹ́ sà, a kújọ́ mẹ́ta o.
Ọjọ́ kan
Eh,
pẹ̀lú iṣẹ́ ńkọ́?
A dúpẹ́, iṣẹ́ ń lọ déédé. A
Inú
dúpẹ́
mi dùn,
lọ́wọ́
inú
àwọn
mi
Yorùbá.
dùn.
Bẹ́ẹ̀
Ẹbí ńkọ́?
wọ́n ń bẹ dáadáa.
Inú mi dùn, inú mi dùn. Mo fẹ́ bá ẹ sọ̀rọ̀ tipẹ́tipẹ́ nípa àṣà Yorùbá, nípa ẹ̀sìn Yorùbá, nípa èdè Yorùbá. Láti sọ òtítọ́ fún yín, ìgbà tí mo dé Florida ọdún tí ó kọjá, inú mi dùn gan-an ni. Ó yà mí lẹ́nu torí pé mo wá rí pé mo pàdé ẹnìkan tó gbọ́ Yorùbá pátápátá. Inú mi dùn gan torí pé ó dàbí ni pé ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀ àwọn ènìyàn káàkiri àgbáyé wọ́n lérò pé kò ṣeé ṣe láti gbọ́ Yorùbá, kò ṣeé ṣe láti sọ Yorùbá. Ó dàbí ni pé àwọn ènìyàn tó lérò bẹ́ẹ̀ yẹn wọ́n fẹ́ gbìyànjú, wọ́n fẹ́ kẹ́kọ̀ọ́. Mo fẹ́ bẹ̀rẹ̀ nǹkan kan lọ́wọ́ yín. Kí ló dé tí àwọn ènìyàn lérò bẹ́ẹ̀ yẹn? Kí ló dé tí wọ́n fẹ́ gbọ́ tàbí sọ èdè Yorùbá? Kò sọ fún mi.
Ẹ ṣé, ìṣòro àgbà, mo sì fẹ́ kí yín pé ẹ kú àyájọ́ ọjọ́ gbogbo àwọn òrìṣà tá ń pè ní ọjọ́ ìṣẹ̀ṣe day. A ní ṣàṣẹmọ o. Ìṣẹ̀ṣe ò ní bàjẹ́, àwọn Ìrúnmọlẹ̀ ó gbè wá. Lójú tèmi, àwọn tí wọ́n sọ bẹ́ẹ̀, bóyá wọ́n rí àwọn ẹlòmíì tí wọ́n ń kó ìrẹ̀wẹ̀sì ọkàn bá wọn, bóyá wọn ò tì wọ́n lẹ́yìn, wọn ò kì wọ́n láyà pé ó lè ṣe máa ṣe ó ṣeé ṣe, ẹ gbìyànjú, ó gbọ́ Yorùbá kankan. Ìyẹn àkọ́kọ́. Ṣùgbọ́n ẹlẹ́ẹ̀kejì tó nípọn jùlọ ni pé àwọn èèyàn wa tó wà nílẹ̀ òkèèrè tí wọ́n ń ṣe òrìṣà nílànà àwọn Cuba tàbí àwọn Brazil tàbí àwọn Trinidad, láti ìgbà tí àwọn òyìnbó amúnisìn kó wọn lẹ́rú wá sí ilẹ̀ Amẹ́ríkà, ìgbà tí èdè Yorùbá ti sọnù, ó parun. Wọ́n ń dábì ìgbàgbọ́ kan pé èdè tí àwọn fi ń kọrin fáwọn Ìrúnmọlẹ̀, fáwọn òrìṣà, pé èdè Yorùbá àyájọ́ àtijọ́ ni, tó ti sọnù nílẹ̀ Yorùbá nǹkan tí ò rí bẹ́ẹ̀. Nítorí náà ó dà pé àwọn ìgbàgbọ́ téèyàn ní ó ti di àtẹnudẹ́nu fún wọn. Tí ẹnìkan bá dóṣù òrìṣà kan tàbí ó tẹfá, àwọn tí wọ́n jẹ́ ọ̀gá fún wọn, wọ́n máa ń sọ fún wọn wípé ìgbà míì o kì í ṣe gbogbo ìgbà, wọ́n lè sọ pé àṣà ti sọnù, òrìṣà ti sọnù nílẹ̀ Yorùbá, nílẹ̀ adúláwọ̀ tá ń pè ní Áfíríkà, ó ti sọnù, àwa gangan là ń gbé àṣà lárugẹ. Irú ìgbàgbọ́ bẹ́ẹ̀ tó ní ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀ irú nínú, èèyàn máa ń kó sínú, wọ́n máa ń tẹ̀lé. Àti pé ó ṣòro fún ọmọ kan tàbí ọmọ awo tàbí ọmọ òòṣà láti fi ta nǹkan tí ọ̀gá wọn sọ lẹ́nu, torí àrífín ni. Kò dẹ̀ sí ẹlòmíì tó ṣetán láti ṣàtakò irú ìgbàgbọ́ bẹ́ẹ̀. Nǹkan tá ń ṣe lọ́wọ́ náà ni.
Ó ti yé mi. Jẹ́ kí n ṣàlàyé fún wọn. All right. So what I said to him, so you're hearing us conversing Yoruba. So what I said to him initially was, I was just greeting him. I told him how happy I was to have a conversation with him. I've been meaning to have this conversation with him for such a long time. And then what I said to him in Yoruba language was, well, I was so happy when I met him in Florida last year because I saw that he spoke Yoruba so well. And I said to him that, a lot of people around the world have it in their heads that it's impossible to speak Yoruba or it's impossible to understand it. And so I wanted to know what his thoughts were around it. Oloye, would you like to share with them what it is that your answer back to me?
Sure. Well, first I thanked you and I prayed for Isheshe Day, which I do personally for everyone that's viewing us. Today is Isheshe Day, every 20th of August in Yoruba land, at least on the Nigeria side of Yoruba land. Yoruba land is bigger than that. But on the Nigeria side, every 20th of August, we celebrate Isheshe Day, which is a celebration of the mosaic and the colorful spectrum of deities and the culture of the Yoruba people, which is, of course, a global spiritual and cultural tradition and phenomenon. And I mentioned two thoughts that I had. Number one is that they may have experienced discouragement from some people or lack of encouragement from some. And secondly, there's also some false narratives, some erroneous beliefs that have been propagated so that since the time of the transatlantic slave trade, when Yoruba people were brought by slave masters, and eventually the Yoruba language was lost as a vernacular, as a daily mother tongue, certain beliefs became like generational. And so here today in Cuba, Brazil, Trinidad, we have people disseminating this myth that what they use for singing songs for the Orisha is actually ancient Yoruba language that was lost in West Africa, or Africa as they normally term the whole continent. And you hear it even to today. So unfortunately, these beliefs are very difficult to eradicate. And there isn't very many people ready to clarify and to work against these false narratives. These are some of my experiences. And I would like to add another one, just laziness, spiritual laziness, if you will. I think people are so ready for cookie cutter or things that are already put in documents, readily readable, podcasts, and that's it. People assume they have no work to do. But when you have people functioning in a priestly role, that means that the work is much more than just an ordinary layperson and devotee. Those are just some of my thoughts.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts. So I want to go back to what you said because it's very important. But I want to ask you. So, what would you say is the one of the biggest benefits for learning the language? Maybe for people who are in our culture, but also for people who are not, for people who are just interested in languages, or what would you say is like one of the biggest benefits? What's in it for them?
Well, anyone that can learn more than one language, it opens a whole new realm, a whole new world, and broadens one's community. If a person speaks more than one language, they can interact with others of different cultures and have a better understanding of the worldview and the practices and the protocol, and even just enjoy other human beings, and increase their network and friendships and even extended family. So that's the number one benefit. And there's other realms, even in terms of employment and vocation, profession. Um, that's for anyone. We live in a global world now. It's not just limited to our neck of the woods, and so people can tap into that, and it just makes the world a smaller place. And that's just for the ordinary individual. And then going further into the spiritual aspect, on our specific, the Yoruba culture, obviously there's so many levels of depth in Yoruba tradition, and the key is in the language. And there's more to it, of course. But yeah, that's the way I see it.
Yeah. So I wanted to say, like when I have to say this. So when I was speaking to you in Florida last year, it was such a profound emotional experience for me,
Mm,
but also a profound spiritual experience. And I'll explain why. It's because I realized that you were not born in Nigeria, and I was not born in Nigeria. I'm from St. Croix, Virgin Islands. You have roots in Puerto Rico. So the
mhm,
fact that I was able to speak and express myself, and you were able to answer me, and I was able to understand you, made me think so much about our ancestors, who had everything stripped away from them. And felt like such a monumental achievement just to be able to speak to someone else in the diaspora. I mean, completely in a language that was originally indigenous to us, right? So it was such a profound experience. And when I was talking, I kept saying to myself, "Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening," because it's so rare to find
yeah.
someone who actually speaks the
Hmm.
language. I was like, "Oh my God, I can't
Yeah.
believe this," you know. And
Yeah.
so, to your point, so one of the benefits is just one fulfillment, as you said,
Hmm.
just the fulfillment, and then the
Hmm.
personal growth and development. I like what you said about spiritual laziness, and I'll explain why. Because at the end of the day, a lot of it comes down to desire. How much desire do we have to learn not
Correct.
only this language, to learn anything, right? Or to do anything.
Hmm.
But spiritual laziness, it's so correct, because one of the things I wanted to do here today was share tips for learning the languages. And I remember, like, many years ago, you know, I remember I would be in classes in Oakland, and people would either not show up to the class, right? Or
Hmm.
they wouldn't study. They might show up, but then they wouldn't study, right? So while
Yeah.
they might show up regularly to classes, they wouldn't be studying in between. Therefore, they could never progress, right? So it goes back
Hmm.
to the spiritual laziness that you talked about.
Hmm.
So how did you begin your journey into this language, and why has it been continued to be so important for you over the years? Tell us about your journey into the language, when you decided to study it, how long it took you to achieve some level of fluency.
So first, I want to say that I too was also years ago when we first connected online and we spoke in Yoruba language and exchange. I also was overjoyed, and that's happened with other folks as well. It's something very special to me, and when I've made those connections with folks that have also, you can see the effort. So that effort is recognized, it's acknowledged. Um, and I when I first began, I was exposed first to the Afro-Cuban spiritual tradition, what they call Regla de Ocha, or the Lukumi religion, commonly known as Santeria, which is Orisha's practice in Cuba. This is what I was first exposed to in New York City as well as Puerto Rico, both places where I've lived and grew up. And initially, it was also exotic and seductive and beautiful and empowering, and it still is. But at a point, I recognized that um, the remnants of Yoruba language that were being used within the context of ritual is not actually something that folks understand in that tradition and other diaspora manifestations of Orisha tradition. And that was something that was a bit disappointing for me. It was something that it just didn't sit right especially acknowledging the fact that Yoruba language is still spoken, that these people that speak an indigenous language, West African language, with 30 plus dialects, they still exist, and they also live in other parts of the world. Through the modern diaspora, if you will. And so, at first in New York City, getting exposed to the Cuban tradition, and even the syncretism was very exotic and beautiful and empowering in a sense when you see Africans can acknowledge the divine and the divinities even of their oppressor. We moved to North Carolina, to Vietnam, as they call it, Fayetteville, where Fort Bragg is there. And when I moved, I felt like I was in a cultural desert in a sense. There's a lot of Puerto Ricans, a lot of Haitians, a lot of different ethnic, Caribbean people there. So it brings people together. But in terms of Orisha, at that time, Orisha had not spread throughout the states as it has today. And we're talking, it was about 1989 when we moved down to North Carolina. So I felt like I was in a vacuum. But luckily, when I started going to the library at the Fayetteville Library, public library, they had what they call the Foreign Language Institute, or Foreign Language Service, Foreign Service, something. It has about 36 different audio tapes with tone exercises and all in Yoruba language. So that was a gem. And I didn't see that in New York. I didn't see that elsewhere. And I would use that, as boring as it was, because, you have to go through the methodical, the tedious tone exercises. But that really helped. And I would also rent some music tapes, and then eventually got CDs. I got all that, and it opened a whole new world. It was indeed possible to connect directly to the sources of these manifestations of Orisha tradition. And so that's how I got started, just on my own, just, pure desire to understand what it is that's being said in these songs and understand the greetings. And, obviously I was bilingual, so it would just be I had that, how do you say, that base to learn another language. Eventually, I moved back to New York after meeting other people. They practice other kind of traditions, sometimes self-created, if you will. I got back to New York City, and I met my Oluo through someone that had posted Babalao from Oshogbo would be in the States, and made the plans to go to Nigeria. That was in 1998. Was my first trip. And before then, I also took a few weeks or maybe 3 months of private lessons with a Yoruba instructor that helped. But once I started going to Nigeria, I didn't speak the language at all. I knew some greetings. I knew the concept of tones. So it was frustrating because you're not able to communicate your needs, what you feel, what you'd like to learn, and you can't deliver what you feel like as an adult. Okay, this is what I should be able to do this. So thinking also, had I been raised in Yoruba land, I would have learned this as a child. So that really pushed me to want to develop in the language. And I said, and I didn't meet, obviously I didn't meet folks like yourself. I didn't meet anyone. All I had heard throughout my, pre-adolescence, adolescence, and early adulthood is that it's impossible. Orisha was lost in West Africa. We're the ones that preserved it here in the diaspora. We preserved the ancient Yoruba language that was lost in Africa. So I was hearing all of that. I was getting bombarded by that which could easily discourage anyone. And I said, no, there's something not right about that. And sure enough, I was right. It's a living language, and it is possible for anyone to learn this. I'm a testament. You are.
Right. So what would you say? What are your tips for people who want to learn this language or any language? What advice would you give them?
Well, I think with adult language speakers, we have that extra element of ego, of shame. So working through the shame, working through the ego, everyone has ego, but tempering it with understanding and also constantly reminding yourself, it's okay, this is a step, step in my progress. To not give up, that's number one. Don't give up. It's possible. Language acquisition takes years because there's vocabulary, there's grammar, and you need more vocabulary than grammar. But grammar is the glue that puts things together, it helps you to be understood, and helps people to understand you. So you have to go through that, even if it's tedious. Stick with it. Don't get discouraged. Don't let the naysayers discourage you. Even some Yoruba people, maybe young folks or others that are not used to someone speaking their language, may be discouraging. Other Yoruba people are super excited. Stick with the folks that have, they may be excited initially, but if they start to engage and correct you and your ego is not all the way in the sky here, and you can accept correction, it's going to take you far, any person far. Also, think about how children learn in their childhood. They play, they joke around. It's okay to joke around. It's okay to, also, people give it just, you make mistakes. People are gonna make mistakes. When we learn language, we're gonna make tons of mistakes. Accept it from the very beginning that you're gonna make mistakes. Don't beat yourself up for it, for making mistakes. That's part of the process. Mistakes are good. As a matter of fact, anything you want to do in life, when you make mistakes or fall into some little pitfall, you learn valuable lessons that you don't have to go through again. So you want those mistakes and you want those corrections ad lib. Language is not, everything in language is not put in textbooks. You're not going to see it on the internet. It's when you make mistakes and you correct it at that moment and you can jot it down and memorize it, that you're going to grow immensely. So make those mistakes. Be ready to make mistakes. Get rid of that shame. Try to revert back to childhood and just enjoy the process. Enjoy the discovery. And also acknowledge that Yoruba is filled with idiomatic expressions. I'm sorry to tell you, it's filled, well, not you, but everyone else that's listening to us, it's filled with idiomatic expressions that are not the same as in English. So you can't take a Yoruba English Yoruba dictionary and think you're going to be able to translate. It doesn't work that way. The dictionary is good for terms and maybe a thesaurus. I don't know if they have nowadays a thesaurus, but dictionaries usually function with a little bit of a thesaurus in it. That's to accumulate vocabulary. But at the end of the day, your actual speaking with the use of idiomatic expressions, the grammar, is what's going to make you understood, allow you to be understood, and also allow you to understand others. So,
I'm so happy you said that because, like, you can't just pick up a dictionary or you can't just Google something. The reason why it's because most people are not aware, but we are aware that there's a language crisis that's happening globally, that's been happening. And I was first made aware of this around 2007. That basically the crisis is that many of the world's languages are expected to die by the turn of the century. And it goes back to what you were saying. When a language dies, it's not just that you're losing words, you're losing a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge. So losing a language is like losing like a universe, or like losing a bunch of universities, because there's all this wisdom, all this knowledge in there that's not documented in our world. So it's not like you just run to Google or run here and say, oh, let me just say it this way. It's a whole universe that we stand to lose, which is why it's important for us to become more aware about language. So I wanted to ask you this question. So, like, on the spiritual side, like what would you say might be like maybe the number one spiritual insight you've gained just from study of the language, as opposed to not studying? Like, if you didn't study the language, then you wouldn't have known it.
So one thing that Orisha practitioners in the diaspora do is that the place like Cuba are actually very good with memorization. They're excellent memorizing. However, it's rote memorization and it's not actually understanding what is being said. So there's not another dynamic there that's going on. It's parrot-like repetition. And oftentimes the tones are, not accurate. So sometimes even if they may memorize, it's a struggle for us to actually understand what are you trying to say or recite, even though it may be something directly from West African source. One thing that has been such a beautiful discovery is understanding what we're actually singing for the deities and the sacred text, the sacred body of knowledge in the form of Oduifa, in the form of Oduosa, in the form of Uriki, in the form of Owe, the proverbs, has been just, it's beautiful. It gives you so much inspiration. The songs, the melodies, the language is already melodic. So it's beautiful already. It already comes with this musicality. Once you actually understand what is being sung, that means you can engage at a different level. And I see folks in the diaspora, Brazil, Trinidad, Cuba, engaging, but it's mostly a type of engaging, almost like a sequence that they've memorized from past generations, from generations that, at a certain point, there were some bilingual individuals. Before then, there were Yoruba language fluent speakers of the language in these countries. But after those generations, that was completely lost. So a lexicon that they work with has been helpful. But when you actually understand what you're saying, there's so many levels of understanding. There's so much depth. If you look, for example, at a typical verse of Oduifa or a verse of Oduosa, the very beginning are the Awo, the Olu, or the diviners. So people may say, oh, those are just the names of the diviners. But oftentimes there's metaphor there. There's other understanding. There may even be proverbs. So right from the jump, the verse is giving you some understanding or some messages to deliver for healing to the client, the querent, the person that's come for consultation. And the songs, the engaging, if the songs are melodic and emotional enough, once you actually understand what you're saying, it's completely different. It really is. And there's levels of depth of understanding, of fluency. So that means that, you can go down the rabbit hole if you like. It's up to you. It's up to you.
So we have one question. She's asking, what is the origin of the Yoruba language, or where? So your thoughts on that?
Well, origin of the Yoruba language. The Yoruba people, or the Yoruba language is part of a family, Niger-Congo family of languages. And linguistically, people like Victor Manfredi, who's a linguist, he studied the spread of what's called Ifa divination, that kind of geomantic divination system, as well as geologists or geographers, such as Akin Ogundare, I believe is his name, Ogundare. They've been able to trace the Yoruba people, which means the Yoruba language, right, from the Niger-Benue confluence. That is in the area of present-day Nigeria where the Niger River and the Benue River meet. There were various societies. There was very congested, a lot of civilization, a lot of trade going on. And from there, they spread downwards into their current locations. Before then, there's only speculation, but we know that as far as, scientifically, what we know is that they spread from that region southerly and then went westerly to all those areas. So the Yoruba people, as well as their language, spread from that region. I know we've heard for generations already that the Yoruba people came from Middle East or Egypt. There's no proof of that. Obviously, the African continent is a huge continent. There's been intermingling between ethnic groups for so many, for millennia, thousands of years already. There is no proof necessarily. And according to Akin Ogundare, when the Yoruba people were already establishing their identity as an ethnic group, ancient Egypt was doing the same thing. So it was a simultaneous at that time frame. So we can give up that idea of the Yoruba people migrated from the Middle East or from Egypt. What we do know is that Nigeria-Benue confluence, and they came down from those areas into, from the savannah into the belt of more lush forest, rainforest, etc.
Okay, we have another question. This one is from Ashanti. Thank you, Ashanti. He's asking you if you will be offering classes regularly.
Well, I actually do. Usually, I do it nowadays with my own personal my own personal students or godchildren, if you will. So we do that from time to time. I haven't offered anything because recently now there's also a lot of Yoruba language instructors online on Facebook and Instagram, which I'm really happy about. And there's no competition. That's one thing that we have to get out of our heads, that there's room for everyone, and we're in competition with ourselves. So what I see is that there's more interest in the language, is growing, and I'm really pleased, especially folks that are focusing on Ishashe Yoruba, West African practice of Orisha. They're seeing the value of it, and they're encouraging and Yoruba language speakers with much more experience and education in the language at a university level. And so we're seeing that growth on the internet. And I do teach usually a beginner level. So maybe in the future I'll offer something more public, but for right now I'm focused on my house members.
Excellent. So I wanted to switch it up a little bit because I know we wanted to talk about language, but since you're also Ifa priest, you give people advice. I want to talk about what would be your advice. How should I put it? What is your advice to people who are just struggling? Because the reality is, a lot of people are just struggling, whether it's emotionally with depression or family issues. I just wanted to switch to offer. What would be your hope to people? What's your advice to people who are whether they're in a dark place right now? What would be your suggestion as to how they might overcome this, whether it's relationship, whether it's financial, whatever it is? What would be your tips just from your own experience?
Well, one thing I love about the tradition that we selected to practice our spiritual path is that it's based on philosophy. It's also not disconnected from the mundane world. And we're not focused on salvation and the hereafter. We're focused on the now also and future generations. So our tradition is very practical, and we have various methods to help an individual grow and follow their path. So we have spiritual consultation and sacrifice. That is the outcome of that. We also have guidelines, and we have celebration. We have proverbs. So we can address a person's circumstances in the here and the now through various forms of methodology. If people are in a dark place in depression, that's also why we have celebration. We have music, we have dance, we have praise poetry. We even have praise names for people. So that if someone is in a place where they're angry, upset, or sad, we have ways of caressing them just with language and making them understand that they too are valuable. So we believe in addressing issues on various levels. We also don't have this belief that once you take care of any spiritual work, you're good to go and everything's gonna be. No, we don't believe that. That's not reality. The reality is that we have to address issues in various ways. So as people that come to us for consultation, we're also counselors, in a sense, therapists. I have a few folks that I know that are in my circle that are either friends or personal, amawo or acquaintances that have training within this tradition, but they also have, training in psychology. They're therapists, counselors in other ways. So that really helps. Yeah, don't get discouraged if it's within the tradition, if it's in the language or in life in general. Find ways to follow your passion. Everyone has something that they feel really strongly about. Don't let people discourage that fire or try to quench it. That fire is what's going to take you far. And if people are thinking, well, I'm getting discouragement from all over the place. It's not possible to do this. And how am I going to survive? One thing I've found to be true is that you follow what you feel flames, you gives fire to your flame, just do it. Eventually, it's all gonna make sense. Stay completely focused on that. Have that drive, and turn out that naysayer chatter. Turn it off. Learn. Be open to criticism, positive criticism, but don't quench that fire.
So I love what you said about not quenching that fire. It's so important. Recently, I shared on Facebook Live some tips for people who wanted some insight into following the purpose. And so one of the things, purpose, and one of the things I always go back is to what you just said, more or less, is the flame, connecting with your inside, understanding what you feel strongly about. And then also, what's also important, even as we look at our tradition, our spiritual tradition, I mean, my point of view, even though this is a vast tradition, it doesn't mean that we have to you know, explore like every single facet of it, but we could we could find a lane that we want to explore and use that
Mm-hmm.
if to inspire us. I mean, some people are into dance, maybe they can explore the dance side. Some people are into divination, they could go down that route. So it's
Mm-hmm.
about, I think, finding ways, finding where that flame is, and
And
allowing
yeah.
that flame to grow, letting that flame guide us. So we have another question here, I think. So this is from Francis Bradley. She's asking, are the translations in books like Renifa based on knowledge of the language? I'm not
Mm.
familiar with that book.
I am. Yeah.
Well, I think I've had it, I've heard it, but I'm not that part I don't know, and I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he has the answer for that. I don't have that answer.
Yeah. So this book is a series of books written by author and Balorisha John Mason. He's an African
Mhm.
American Lukumi priest of Obatala and from New York. And I have that book since wow, I think I bought it when I was in Puerto Rico or before we moved to North Carolina. I can't remember exactly when I got that book. And I've gotten other books of his. I have quite a big Orisha and Yoruba culture library, as well as books about different African cultures, and especially diaspora manifestations of African-based religions. And well, I can say some of the translations in the book, in let's say Ori Orisa, as well as some of his other books and other books I've seen, are based on knowledge of the language, maybe loose words. Um, Interestingly enough, when I moved back to New York from North Carolina, I just wanted to meet Orisha people. I was back in New York where there's so many Orisha practitioners, and still mostly people that practice the Afro-Cuban tradition. And so I went to visit him one day, and it was my brownstone, and he revealed to me that when he was writing that book, I don't know if it was that book or some other books, he had a native Yoruba speaker working with the translations, because John Mason doesn't speak the language fluently. And but we give praise and thanks to all the work that he's done, because it has its purpose. It's really fueled and inspired people to understand there is deeper levels to this. So no, not to discredit whatever at all. It's something that's really good, and it's about a process of reaffirming, re-embracing language. Well, he revealed to me that apparently the native Yoruba speaker wasn't doing the translations to his liking. I think he mentioned that he wasn't doing a good job or wasn't correct. I don't know exactly the terminology, can't remember. But then his wife suggested that he do the translations, and so he admitted that he just took a English Yoruba dictionary and started trying to translate verbatim the songs. And as I grew in the language, I realized that there are quite a few gaps. The blessing is that as I've been going to Nigeria since '98, I've learned a lot of the songs that they sing in the diaspora. I've learned the original versions, including faster and slower paces, longer and shorter versions, but I've learned it within spoken Yoruba language and its dialects, because there are regional dialects. And I've acknowledged that some songs that are quite common in Cuba or Brazil, they are more common in specific regions of Yoruba land. So that's why when a Cuban or Brazilian or Trinidadian goes to Nigeria or Benin Republic for 2 weeks, and they don't encounter some of the songs that they've heard their whole lifetime, they may assume, oh, we've preserved songs that were lost in Yoruba land. Well, no, that's actually not the case. There's a number of the songs that people sing in the diaspora are specific to regional dialects in Yoruba land and don't quite make sense outside of those regions sometimes. So that's a beautiful thing. Discovering, I've seen the attempts at translations in books such as Orin Orisha by John Mason and some other authors, and I've also learned more accurate songs sung in Yoruba land. So one has to keep an open mind and praise previous generations, but not stay complacent. Because remember, the elders have their role to play. We have ours as younger generations. The elders make a foundation, and I know for a fact that parents usually want the best for their children. So it makes me reflect upon how must have life been for Yoruba people and other Africans that were enslaved and brought over to a whole different world, whole different land, without knowing how the future would be. Keeping their traditions alive, their belief, their deities, their worship, their philosophy of growth. I know that they did the best they could do with the hope and understanding that their descendants would pick up from where they left off and do even better. I know that to be a fact. So it's for us to not stay complacent. All praises to past generations. That's part of our tradition, to pay homage. But we have work to do. We're in a different realm, a different society. Our tradition is global. We're speaking from across the United States. You're on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast completely. So many people travel to West Africa. There's no excuse for us. If we truly take our tradition seriously, that includes language. We must make no qualms about it. Because any tradition worth its weight, any faith-based tradition and community knows the value of their language. It's part of identity. All of our understanding of the deities that we serve, our creation stories, our sacred stories, sacred texts, they're all in Yoruba language. They're not in any other language. They're being translated, or some things are lost in translation. If you look at any other, you can mention Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, any of the faiths that are global nowadays, they have folks, maybe not everyone, and that's okay too. Doesn't have to be everyone. But they have specialists, people that specialize and hone in on the sacred text and the original languages. We need that in our traditions. And I say that for the diaspora as well. If I've been going to, let's say, some of these global international conferences, like the Orisha conferences that would happen, and they would use the language of the host country. That was really good. I really like that. What happens though, if we made Yoruba language the lingua franca of all Orisha people throughout the world, regardless of what expression of Orisha one practices? That puts people in a more even playing field. Hey, I'm just saying, I mean, if people are comfortable with having others have an edge over them because they speak the language, that's okay, I guess, for them. That's not okay for me, though. That's not okay for me. I don't think it's okay for our tradition.
Oh, we have another question, Craig. Thank you, Craig, for thank you also for your all people for the questions. He's asking you if you're aware of Oyotunji village, which I'm sure you are, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I am. Mm-hmm. In South Carolina, Beaufort County, and I've met people since long before I was initiated. I've met people from Oyotunji village. I praise all of their efforts. And they have a very unique American expression of Orisha tradition, obviously with Afro-Cuban base. And then throughout generations, when they bought the land and created the kingdom, some people traveled to Yoruba land. So they've also adopted and adapted some West African Yoruba practices, as well as dress and some elements that they've been able to acquire over the years. They also have other practices that are part of their expression, such as comedic. They practice. They have different understanding of Haitian Vodou, etc. It's very American, if you will. Something that was created here in the States. Yeah.
All right. So we're almost at the 45-minute mark, and so we're gonna
Okay.
move to a close pretty quickly. So I'd like to know what would be your final word, your final bit of wisdom, like life
Mm.
advice. Like okay,
Mm.
like let's say you know, like like your final bit of words of wisdom you would like to impart to people. Like what would be your wish for them as they look at life, as they look at their potential, as they think
Mhm.
about their purpose? What would that piece of advice or wisdom be?
Yeah. Well, life is short. So we have to make the most of it by enjoying what life's about, and that is what the wonderful thing about our tradition, that it is celebratory. At all stages of life are celebratory, and it's important for each of us to enjoy the time that we have on this earth with our loved ones, enjoy ourselves, and also leave an impact. And don't think of the little bit of contribution that you can bring is of no value. And our tradition eh, celebrates the mosaic, celebrates diversity. Our tradition is inherently diverse. So no one lifestyle is going to be the same for everyone. I often think about how human population we have so much growth and continuous nonstop. And I see people trying to push this idea that everyone has to be technological, that everyone has to be an academician. Um, but what happens with food to feed all of us? We need those that are going to focus on farming and providing food, that are going to dwell on the food basket. We also need people to lead indigenous lifestyles, even if that's not for us. It doesn't have to be for us. We need to respect indigenous cultures that are very close to the land and to nature. It doesn't mean we stop increasing technological advances, increasing knowledge, but we have to respect the lifestyles of those that are connected to the land. They have their purpose. There's knowledge to gain from them. Those cultures also don't have as much human footprint, if you will, like we do. So we need to embrace that diversity and protect native peoples, indigenous cultures, languages, and learn from them and not look down upon them. Just like something that we may have may be of value to them, but not to come in there and force our lifestyle, our worldview, and disrupt it. We've seen that for so long. We've seen it even recently in Yoruba land. Unfortunately, some of us Westerners go to Yoruba land with our Western mentality, and uh, we think we're doing good. Some of us, we're not always doing good. So we have to be mindful of that, of our impact.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your journey with us. And thank you also for your dedication for decades to preserving language and to make people know, like, one, it's possible. I
Mm.
saw I think a few months ago I saw just a YouTube clip that you did where I think you were in Yoruba land and you were speaking. You know,
Mm.
people were asking you a question, and I was just like blown away, like, wow. You know,
Ah, yeah, that
uh,
was in Los Angeles. That
oh,
was,
that was in Los
I think,
Angeles.
yeah, the Yoruba or the Dua People's Organization. I forgot the actual name of the organization. Please, Yoruba people, ẹ má
Yeah.
bínú sí mi o. Mo ti gbàgbé. Ó sápá mi lórí ni. Ẹ má bínú. So, but yeah, that was a good. I like that because I also did it with a good friend of mine who's very much pro Yoruba growth and culture. And unfortunately, a lot of Nigerians, Yoruba people in Nigeria have been so indoctrinated by, well, Western or foreign religion that it's actually hindered the Yoruba genius, if you will. It's hindered inventions that could have happened. And this is going back to colonial days, but now this part of neo-colonialism is where they've planted this disease, this seed, and it's among the Yoruba people themselves. They keep regurgitating this. So it was a good platform to, and some people made some jest and some negative comments that there's nothing special. This guy speaks our language. We speak his language. Most people don't know that I speak 4 languages, and I've been bilingual. But it's true. It shouldn't be a big deal. To me, at this stage, it shouldn't be a big deal that me and you speak the language. It should be good to praise people that do, but Yoruba language has been global. There's written literature in the language with all the tone marks. Yoruba people have mastered the use of diacritics. There's old literature. There's daily magazines and internet, YouTube videos, news in Yoruba language. So it shouldn't be, such a big surprise.
All right. Well, thank you once again on that note. I'd like to thank you and thank, the ancestors, for keeping you connected to that flame on your journey. And I want to thank all of those who took time out of the day to tune in. If you have any additional questions, just feel free to reach out to me. And if you have any other comments for Baba, if you send them to me, I could pass them on to him. But thank you so much for your time today. Enjoy.
Thank you, Baba. It was a pleasure.
Yes.
Have a great day. Odabo.
Odabo.